Questions? Who's got one? Yes, sir.
Professor, you mentioned that in China now, a graduate is looking for work and can't find it. In this country, the same is true. In Europe, the same is true. In Japan, they've been moribund for decades. Where is growth in the world going to originate? What's going to pull us out of this current malaise?
That's a terrific question, because to answer that question briefly, we go back to where was growth coming from in everywhere, in the US, Europe, and elsewhere in the past 2 or 3 decades. There were 3 or 4 reasons. And now we look, are those 3 or 4 reasons still working now? One was deregulation. So deregulation created a lot of damage, but it was excessive, but it also created a lot of growth. We cannot expect more deregulation. If anything, we have to expect less deregulation. I mean, if we realize why the financial crisis came, we know where it came. Subprime mortgages, number 1. Securitization. Number 3, the rating agencies and the Security and Exchange Commission. I always say, if I had to explain to non-economists, not here, I would say, the equivalent, say, there was inadequate regulations, because the commercial banking sector was well regulated, and that's not where the crisis came from. It was in the investment sector. So, inadequate regulation, the regulations that existed were not applied. Greed, profits at all costs. Greed, which is ethics. Sometimes they say, how do you define it? You cannot define all the things that are, but the one way I define ethics is this. Would you want what you do or what you say be known to your family and your friends? If you would not want it to be known because it would embarrass you, that is unethical, which is different than illegal. Okay? So now, fraud, greed and fraud. You can have all the rules you want, but Madoff made $64 billion disappear. He says he did it by himself. You could not do that, because we have a law in economics. This economies of scale. You cannot by yourself operate $62 billion by yourself. So, of course, he went to jail. He's not a hero. He's not going to come out of jail. Why bring his family in, or his friends and so on? He's not going to get out of jail and so on. So now, to come back, so now, we are not going to have, so deregulation helped. 60% of that deregulation was a very stimulating, it was the rest that did not do the job. So we're not going to have more of that. We are not going to have financial innovations. Financial innovations, I mean, credit default swaps, even though Buffett says is what did they call it? Sometimes were originated to cover risk. So well done, but it's not well done. So we are not going to have more financial. What about IT, information technology? So information technology, we have no reason to believe that it will operate less effectively now. Then the United States created reasons for growth by overspending, unsustainable, the budget deficit and so on, and emerging markets growing. These were the 5 factors that accounted for rapid growth in the past decades. Deregulation, financial innovation, information technology, the overspending by the US stimulated, and emerging markets. The first 2, we are not going to have more financial, more deregulation. So not much growth will come from that. If anything, we are re-regulating. We are not going to have more financial innovations. Information technology could contribute to growth this decade as in the past. The United States cannot continue to overspend and generate. When Europe told us, the rest of the world, you overspend, they should be delighted. We created 500 billion extra demand for foreign products at our future expense and so on. And emerging markets are not growing as much. So, if anything, if anything, growth this decade is likely to be less. If it was say, an average, weighted average for the world, if it was 4–5% the past decade, we can think more of 2 or 3%. 1 or 2% in the advanced countries, 3 or 4% in emerging markets. So basically, that's some of the question. Unfortunately, we have to look at this as, but then there is, talking about financial deregulation. You know what makes me laugh? Is they try to legislate all of the things that are illegal. That is a futile, you judge, futile. I mean, I cannot anticipate all of the things that financial wizards are going to invent. In fact, the moment you spell out all the things that are illegal, you are also telling me what is legal. Anything else that I can manufacture, that I can invent, and that's how. So how should innovation come? I said this, and a minister of finance in France was bewildered, and he repeated it. There is no way that you can legislate everything. So now, the regulations, or the regulations of financial sector, have to be broad. They have to involve every sector of the economy, because we know that the crisis came from the investment sector, which was not well regulated. Cox, the head of the Security and Exchange Commission, when he testified in front of Congress, came out as a nitwit. He was completely incompetent. To say the least, he was asleep at the wheel. Okay? So now, you make regulations which have to be broad, not specific, but involve the entire sector, and leave something to interpretation. In other words, interpretation. Don't do dangerous financial instruments. How do you define dangerous? When Cox went in front of Congress, he was asked, how do you price the credit default swaps? He could not say, or he did not want to say. Either way, either he was ignorant, or he was lying, because it was, it reminds me once, Robert Hoover, the former Treasury Secretary, said at a round table at NYU, I did not know the trouble. You see, he was under the Secretary of the Treasury, then he went to Citibank. Citibank is the weakest of our large banks. And when they got in trouble, at this round table, he said, oh, I was not involved. I did not know what Citibank was doing. He said, Mr. Rubin, you were paid in 9 years $110 million. And you are telling us that you did not know? That means either you were paid for doing nothing, or you were paid and you were directly involved. Therefore, if you got this illegal or unethical or unfair, why don't you return $100 million, leaving you only, you got $110 million in 9 years, leaving you only $1 million a year, because you earned this at the expense of people who lost everything. So you see, you hear things which are crazy. It's unbelievable. One after Stiglitz. I have the quotation. Stiglitz said in 2006, 2007, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is the best thing that happened in this country. You want to change? That is the only thing that's working well. And I stake my reputation that it will never get in trouble. Do you know who owns Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? We do. Do you know how much we own? $151 billion. We cannot call it nationalization, because that's anathema. You cannot mention the word. But we own $151 billion. AIG, the largest insurance company in the world, we own $181 billion of that.
That's
I mean, this is
a negative sign, right?
Yeah, so, in other words, so this is crazy. So the things that we hear are unbelievable. Greenspan, who says in 2002, he doesn't say anything, he ruminates. You know, he really has to which is good for a central banker. This is an advantage, because you remember that the European Central Bank is the first one, what was that, with the beautiful white hair and piercing blue eyes. Every time he opened his mouth, the poor man talked straight. he got in trouble every time. So Greenspan in 2002, from what we could understand, he was worried about a in 2000, a resurgence of inflation, when in fact it was inflation, it was growth that had collapsed. We were getting into recession. We were already in recession in 2000. And I said once, I was Mr. Greenspan, you do not understand globalization. That's an accusation. If you understood globalization, you would realize that globalization is the most anti-inflationary policy the world has ever seen. You increase prices, you lose markets. You ask for wage increases in excess of productivity, the company moves. Fruit of the loom, the other way for men, are all produced in Mexico, where the union started to demand excessive wage increase. I say in Germany, labor unions became enlightened. They started to work with the firm to see how can we improve productivity to justify wage increases. Because the way it worked is labor unions went to Mercedes. I was involved in. Mercedes said, we have to build motors in the Czech Republic, and we have to build a whole chain of production for Mercedes in the United States, for the United States or North American market. The union said, no, we will go on strike. Mercedes said, if we don't do that, we will go out of business. These are our books. This is our accounting. We don't have two sets of books, one for you and one for us. You look at them and see what's going to happen if we do. And so they made suggestions, the labor unions. Why don't we do this? And management told them why. Oh, we did not know that. Until they went the entire litany of things. After that, they said, okay, so we go ahead. So they started to collaborate. And this is what, so we are not, unfortunately, going to growth, rapid growth. Again, because the conditions, the five, or you can think of others, at least 3 or 4 of the 5 are no longer there. And so what can we expect? Some simulation, some best guess is that, as I've said, that we will grow less than in the past, but we did not expect to still be in the trouble that we are into.
Yes, sir.
Do you see a time when China will stop lending us money?
You know, at one point, I'm not joking, one day, one evening, at dinner, 4 or 5 years ago, I was asked by a high Chinese official, if you had, are you ready for this, 200 or 300 billion dollars, how would you invest it? I thought he was joking, but when I realized that he wasn't joking, I don't do consulting for free over dinner. I said, well, it depends on your horizon. Are you talking about 6 months investment, 1 year investment, 5 years investment? But also stop complaining about these green pieces of paper which are supposedly worthless. What do you mean worthless? You can buy industries. You can buy all sorts of natural resources, which is exactly what they are doing to our worry or danger. China owns the entire textile sector in South Africa and in Nigeria. So, while the African nations welcome this, they are worried that their economy will be completely controlled by farmers, or no country would like its banking sector, its mining sector to be owned. And so I told explicitly to China, only a month and a half ago, I said, you know, when you go to South Africa or to Africa, remember, you are a guest. If labor laws seem to you, and they are, unproductive, you are a guest. You abide by the laws. And why do you look at me in a strange way as if I'm the enemy of, I'm not. What do you do when foreign companies come to China? Don't you demand the same thing? Don't you demand the same thing? So why should it feel strange when you go outside China to behave that way, so that the nations in which you go will be more welcoming to you and not worried that you will control their economy? But there is more about this country that is unbelievable. You judge. I'm not a politician, but we seem, look at the predicament in which we were. And that answers your question in relation to us. China explicitly told General Motors, and we're not talking bad about China, we're talking about what's happened. General Motors, if you want to sell the Volt electric car to China, you must give us your entire technology. This was explicitly said, it's not my opinion. And the United States then, and General Motors, felt in a predicament. If you don't give the technology, you're not allowed to export. If you give the technology, in 2 years they will sell you back a nuclear car. And all of Washington is perplexed. Mark my words. Now, there is a way to solve that problem. I'm not a politician. I'm not in Washington. But maybe I ought to be. If they are standing there to do the job for us and they are paralyzed, they don't know how to handle this. You judge how to handle this. First, we tell General Motors, you cannot give out what is not yours to give. The reason is the Volt was developed with $10 billion, 7 of which came from us, from the US government. So you, General Motors, cannot give out what is not yours to give. We own it. But we understand your predicament. You know, that you cannot, and how to solve that? You go to the World Trade Organization, which China is signatory to the rules and regulations, which state explicitly that you cannot demand my technology as a condition to allow me to export. Okay? That's how you solve the problem. Of course, China will try to get around it and so on. But so now, General Motors, you cannot give this. And you, China, cannot demand from us. This is, we signed, this is our agreement at the World Trade Organization. Specifically, you cannot demand my technology is my property. My property. Do you know how I solved my property? I had 15 illegal translations of one of my texts in China. And the way I knew, professor would write to me, dear professor, can you send me the instructor's manual, which has the answer to the problems at the end of each chapter. So I would say, dear professor, fax to me the front page and the inside cover page of my book, translated into Chinese. So I accumulate 15 of these that I knew of. Okay? And then I went to Predecessor. And I said, we cannot go on like this. And they said, well, professor, you know, we go to China, we go to court, we don't come out before 10 years. I said, but there ought to be some ways to resolve the problem gently. The guy answered, what? Don't you think we've done everything? Well, you know, I'm a kind person. You slap me once, I'll give you the other cheek. But you slap me twice, I'll punch you so hard that you don't I said, you're a lawyer? Will you become a waiter if I solve your problem? I'm the author, not the... How? I tell you how. We pick the top publisher in China, which is Tsinghua University Press in Beijing, which is the equivalent of MIT. And we offer it a very favorable contract. So he said, well, if they do it for nothing, why should they pay? Now you're not even a waiter. Now you become a dishwasher. Because when we go to court, we don't come out in 10 years. But when Tsinghua University Press goes to court in China, they get justice in 6 months. In 1 year, all the illegal translations disappear. I have to apologize, Walker, you heard this before, but it's too beautiful. So we all have to solve the problem. China does its interest. We have to, in a loyal way, do our interest. And there is more. There is more. Boeing and Airbus. Boeing and Airbus. Now you know that the chief market manager, salesperson from Airbus was a student of mine. Maybe I should talk to them and say, you know, they are now, look, China does its interest. We have to buy 5,000 planes, big planes, during this decade. That's a huge number of planes, 300, 400, 500 million each. and we will give contracts to Boeing and or Airbus, whoever gives us their technology more sooner and builds in China. And these two imbeciles of companies, can you believe this? They are fighting each other, who gives more quicker. I don't believe this. Now, they said, but they hate each other. Yes, but there is a common interest. A common interest, we would say in China, you can only buy these planes from us. And we will not play your game. You don't decide the rules of the game. We will not compete with one another this way. If you buy it from us, half of one, half of the other, or you don't get the planes. Japan tried for 40 years to enter that market and was unsuccessful. Mark my words, in 5 years from now, Boeing and Airbus, 10 years for sure, they will be in deep trouble from the competition. They are giving it away. And you have public economy. It's not a market economy. If they need a subsidy, they get a subsidy. We don't give subsidy, but they get subsidy. Okay? So this is the level of, these are the people who are supposed to do our job, protect us, not unfairly, to live by the rules of the game, who are either asleep or moronic. Now, you tell me what's wrong with this reasoning. Why do I'm not in politics, I'm not talking. China deserves its growth. China is working hard, not only work hard, but works in a very deliberate, you deserve the benefits of your hard work. When we were a new nation, copied, and we legal, or Japan copied, every nation does this. But there is a way whereby we invent the iPad and we produce not one of them, and we have to create jobs. We are told we have to innovate more. We created the damn thing and we do not produce any of it. At that rate, we will never. So now, what should firms do? Well, firms should look a little further than 6 months. They have to realize that when they go away and they produce, they lose their technology. So maybe they should sacrifice a little of the short-run profits for their long-run benefit to remain, because there is something else that is bad. When you stop producing something, you will not be able to innovate anymore. Most innovations are not dramatic. Most innovations are gradual, continuous. If you do not produce, you will stop to innovate. I had a major store in Rome that was a leader in fashion and produced suits. Then it began to have the suits made wherever, in Taiwan or Hong Kong and so on. So now they are just a seller. They no longer innovate. From the production, they delocated the production. So now they only sell the suits that they used to make. They became a seller, not a maker of anything. And this is our danger. Corporations, I said before, corporations have a long-range view. They ought to have a long-range view, but they seem that they don't. Or they only complain when the government has policy 6 months. They say it's too short, but they operate that way. They should operate exactly that way. In other words, to say, where will I be 3 years from now if I produce everything elsewhere and give the technology elsewhere? There was a Spanish company that had 33% of the wind power of China 20 years ago. China said, to come here, you must produce 78% of the parts and components in China. And the firm said, but you cannot produce it here. You have to teach us. That same company now has 3% of the market. And they justify, say, China grew so fast that 3% now is the same sales as 33% 20 years ago. Yeah, but in 2 years you're completely out of the market. Once again, China is a terrific country. China works hard, deserves the benefit of its growth. People work hard. People are bright and they work and they deserve. And they do what we try to do and what we did in some ways. But we have to let our interests also be taken into consideration. Because intellectual property is property. Why, if this is my car today, you come and say, this is no longer your car, this is my car. And we reject that. Why is it different when it's intellectual property? It should not be. It should not be, and it is. So now, to go back is, China will continue to grow. China cannot continue to grow the same way it grew before by by export-led growth. It has to rebalance the economy to have more of its growth come from the domestic side, more consumption. But there is what we call in economics the middle income trap. Sometimes economies grow up to a level and they fail to make the next step. And the next step is to improve education, improve technology, so that technology and growth becomes endogenous from within. Many of those countries stop cold. And so China is fully aware. One thing we have to say, the government of China may not be elected democratic, but they know what people want. They know what people want. They want more well-being, and the intelligent is to gradually liberalize, because otherwise, if there is no room for opposition, it creates pressure and explosion if there is no room for opposition. It's like Saddam Hussein. He was surrounded by people. Yes, people, you are great, you are God, you are this. No. It's like, you know, you have, in businesses, you have some of this. You have a CEO who wants to micromanage everything. You're not a CEO. You don't understand anything. You first surround yourself with good people. You, each one is told exactly what is your responsibility. And then you leave it alone, that person, to do what is his or her job. Instead, if you want to micromanage, I go to the Four Seasons for lunch. I see the Metro D helping clean tables. Well, you're a Metro D, you're not a boss boy. We pay a boss boy to clean the tables. You have to oversee, and you have at all levels, university levels, some provosts want to control every little thing. Come. I'm also the chairman of the department. Come and do the scheduling if you want. Go ahead, come. Another dean of the business school was going around shutting off lights. Oh, really? That's your job, to save shutting off lights? You know, that tells me the level of... so we have at all levels these type of people. And if you say, you should see in Europe, I'm a thorn on their side, they are afraid. Because, I mean, if somebody... A minister, can you imagine? The guy says, pension. Listen, and then I stop. Pension. The pension, you have people who... Now, the pension was started 70, 80 years ago, given at the age of 65, when the average length of life was 67. And it was given a minimum. Two people were not provided for old age, and so the government cannot allow a major country to, even if you have not provided, you know, we cannot allow you to live in a life of poverty and so on. But was given 25–30% of the last wage. So now, so was given at 65, when the average length of life was 67, it was given a minimum. So now people live to 90, they want to retire before 65, and they want 80 or 90% of the last salary. And by the way, you know how it works? Is that the last year of your job before you retire, they make you work overtime. So that the last year you earn 125% of what you earned before, and when you retire you get 70–80% of 125%. So you get the same wage. So I said, but this is unsustainable. The ensign, the minister in France, he tells me, but this is the responsibility of the government. And I said, who is the government? We are the government. The government can only take from some and give it to others. So, either you retire later, or you accept less, or you provide also private pension. I became the enemy of labor. So, I said, I'm not the enemy of labor. I don't know where the hell you studied economics, you know, because every time you give a benefit, you have to tell me where it comes from. And the last. I promise, truly the last. You heard this twice, I apologize. In the year 2000, I was at the European Commission, and I said, could the French and German economists identify yourselves, one or two, whatever you are? And I told them, I would like to go to Broadway shows for fun, but I don't have time. But after what I've heard here today, I don't miss the Broadway shows. You can imagine how many friends I have. Why? Because they had just passed a law in France and Germany to go from 40 to 35 hours a week, specifically to create more jobs. In other words, if you work, every 7 workers that work 35 hours instead of 40 hours releases 5 hours of work, 7 workers, 7 times 5 is 35, every 7 workers that work 35 hours instead of 40 hours now create or leave space for 1 more job. So I said, well, you don't have to have any training in economics, but a little gray matter, because if going from 40 to 35 creates more jobs, why don't we go from 40 to 30 hours a week? We create even more jobs. Why don't we go from 40 to 25? We have full employment. Something, in other words, you don't have to be economist. I mean, pushed to the logical conclusion, it becomes funny or sad. You know, my mother always said, when there is reason to cry, smile. Because what I'm saying. Why? Because they wanted to go, now economics comes, but it's economics of the first year, the first course in economics. They wanted to go from 40 hours to 35 hours a week, almost implicitly, with the same weekly wage. Which means that the wage per hour increases. The same weekly wage, 40, now you're 35. And then economics, I always say, you don't have the hypothesis of demand. You don't have the theory of demand. You have the law of demand. That when the price of anything increases, you use less of it. So what happened is businesses, when they saw this, they began to use more capital and less labor in production. And the proof, labor unions rebelled after 3 or 4 years, saying, where did you study economics? You had exactly the opposite effect of what you told us. And I say, test your IQ, not just your economics. So you see, and they say the dismal side. No, we have also fun in economics, because when you hear these things, but again, these are sad, as I said, we laugh, but we should cry, because when they make these serious mistakes, we pay a heavy price, But we have left unanswered where we go from here, left or right, do we give more stimulus, less stimulus, implicitly maybe you know the answer.
Let's give the man a hand. That was terrific. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.